This morning I had a brainwave. I finally figured out how to explain Elastos. Because this is a project I've been following for a while. I've seen a lot of YouTube videos on it, and it's a little bit hyped up. The reason for it is because it's so different. And because it's so different, I feel like the way it's been explained has been kind of not been done so well. There's a lot of confusion into what the hell is Elastos? Why is it different? How is it even used in a blockchain? All these questions spring up, and I feel like I got the perfect answer to it, and it includes a Star Wars reference. So this is gonna be Elastos in a nutshell. I'm gonna explore the core principles of how it works, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Okay, so to explain this video, I actually got my iPad out to draw some stuff for it, so I hope to be able to shove it on screen for a sec. So let's start off with how this project works and what it's trying to do. It's trying to protect privacy, but not just privacy for your private data, but even for bigger information, very confidential information. It might be very important medical records that needs to be kept private. It might be company secrets. It might be accounts. All these things are very confidential and you don't want them to be leaked. So Elastos is perfect for something like that. And the project, I think it's important to remember that it's not just a blockchain project, but a whole kind of system overall, how to even manage this sensitive data. So here's the Star Wars reference. Let's imagine the plans for the Death Star, right? The Empire is building the Death Star. This plan must be kept absolutely confidential because anyone who can access it can maybe find a weakness to the Death Star. So right here, we got the plans for the Death Star. And it's going to be, because it's on Elastos, it's going to be in its own isolated environment. This is called a virtual machine, and it's running on Elastos Runtime. So its own version of a very lightweight operating system, and it keeps this kind of system there in a little box. So that's why I drew a little box. This is the Death Star over here. So okay, so what happens here? So if you're a rebel, if you're like an attacker and trying to get the plans, you need to make your own box, all right? And you need to connect to the Death Star. So let's say you breached and you managed to get your own, your Happy Days rebel, you managed to reach that Death Star plan. All right, now what's the easiest way to do it? Let's upload it onto Dropbox, right? That's the easiest way to make sure that plan gets out of there. Let's not even think about saving a floppy drive. Let's put it on a Dropbox. This is in a modern world. But the problem is this. The problem is that this VM here is not connected to the internet. Okay, then no Dropbox. And this is important because the connections to this little box is very isolated, right? So here, even in this connection here, this is called Elastos Carrier, and it's very much like a phone wire. So kind of like wiring these two computers, our virtual machines together, but they don't give you access to the internet, so you can't send that out. Then what can you do? You can't upload it to Dropbox. You can't upload it to YouTube. You can't save it anywhere on the internet. Then you want to let's say you try to download it onto your own virtual machine, the one that's connecting to the Death Star. But you reach a problem here because this computer is also not connected to the internet. No internet. It's on a virtual machine. Crap. Now let's try to save it onto a floppy or save it onto some sort of medium or USB. I'm old school, so I talk about floppies instead of USBs. But what if it doesn't grant you access? What if Elastos Carrier doesn't grant you access to that? So you can see in this situation, you're kind of out of luck. Because if this is on Elastos, if the permissions are not given here, then none of these options will work. So you can't, no internet, you can't connect to YouTube, you can't connect to Dropbox, you can't send this information out, and you can't save it to a USB. So that's why this information now is kept private. Sorry guys, the Empire wins. This Death Star information, it can't be logged out. Well, now you think, okay, this is a super isolated environment. There's very little you can do with this data. I mean, if people can't use it, you can't use it on the internet, what can you do with it? Well, you can open other virtual machines. You can, perhaps you have a engineering AI that scans it. This can be launched as a separate instance on Elastos with its own VM, and then you can connect that to it, scan it for any vulnerabilities, for any errors it might have, that giant hole that the rebels shot a hole in. You can scan it for that sort of vulnerability. And yet again, because it's in an isolated environment, this kind of AI scanner that can't connect to the internet. That can't steal that information. It can probably check and scan it and then make sure it's valid, or if it's not, make sure it's fixed and relay that information over. But because of Elastos Carrier, because that information is only like a two-way communication, it cannot communicate to the outside world, this now can be fixed in absolute privacy. So, okay, so that's a Star Wars reference. What does this mean in real life? Well, let's say that this is not the Death Star, but actually medical records. See, now doctors can connect to it and make sure, well, you can be absolutely certain that, well, the doctor connecting to it doesn't save a copy of your data. And I think I left out one piece of information there. Forgot there. Whenever you close that connection, you destroy the VM. So even if this is a doctor going for medical records, let's say he finished browsing your medical records and closes off that VM. The VM cannot save information. It's erased permanently. It's gone. Boom, your information is kept safe. Your AI, they can't save a copy of information. They can do whatever they can do. They can view that data, but they can't, well, save a copy of it. So that's what makes Elastos powerful. Now, okay, so now this sounds like it doesn't need a blockchain, right? This sounds like, well, it's just another system. It's another kind of internet system. It might be an enterprise-grade internet system. What's the purpose of blockchain here? Well, the idea behind blockchain is it provides the IDs. It provides a secure ID to access something like this. So what happens is that maybe if you want to connect, let's go back to the Death Star reference. I think that was pretty cool. Let's say you want to connect and you're a hacker, you're on the outside internet. Well, because your virtual machine has its unique ID, that ID can be whitelisted to go and access the Death Star or not. So the ID is now provided by the blockchain. So it can even be a hash of the VM as well. So you can actually guarantee that this computer or this instance, this virtual machine that's running, that is a new instance that's provided or has a recorded hash that it's not tampered with. So whatever this is, this computer is secure. Let me just have a green label here. That's a secure because you know by the ID that this is now on the blockchain. This ID, this hash, is now published on the blockchain. You can check that for Elastos. So this provides a trust. You can trust, okay, you can trust this ID. And now you can make that connection. The carrier makes that connection. And this can be verified and checked by both the Death Star documents and by, of course, the carrier to make sure, okay, yeah, this ID is whitelisted, this ID is authentic, and this ID is not tampered with. This instance is not tampered with. It doesn't have any virus or malware or any of that. So then it's a secure communication. So that's kind of how the blockchain is used. It's used to provide a layer of trust for all these the virtual machines, these little boxes that want to connect to a sort of system. So then the next question is, this sounds pretty advanced and pretty different from everything else. So what are the initial applications? See, this is something that I've been wondering for a while because it's so different from everything else, it probably is a little bit harder to develop applications for it because, well, you need to make sure that all these IDs match. You want to make sure that this whole system, that developers understand the system. So for me personally, what I feel like is that this is important for corporate stuff first. So if it's a company that needs to keep a trade secret, maybe Coca-Cola, they have a recipe for Coca-Cola, and that's being kept secret for like decades because the exact formula of how to make Coca-Cola, the order of the ingredients, apparently that's important. That's gonna affect the taste. So I think initially for enterprise, and right now, enterprise, private, and secured hardware is very important, and this is just a natural extension on top of that. They can make sure, well, yeah, there's absolute certainty that the people accessing that data, if it's accounts, Coca-Cola recipes, any of that private data, that they don't steal it and that they only use it in a way that is permissioned, that the Elastos Carrier allows. So I feel like that's probably the first way to approach it, and big data intelligence, maybe even military intelligence is probably a good application because they really need it. Well, next is, I think, consumer level. So a lot of Elastos, when we talk about it, and the ones that I see on the internet, they talk about it from a consumer's perspective. What if we can, keep our own data? Maybe it's like a Facebook that's on Elastos. I think that's going to be coming second because of just how many connections that is needed. So if you imagine if this is our data, or you got our data here, because it's something like Facebook is enormously complicated with so many different connections, so many different users, your friends, your public list, your acquaintances, there's different permissions. I feel like if this is to be built, it's extremely complicated. So I think the number of connections is just too many and it's hard to control. So I feel like the enterprise application, that will probably be what will come first for kind of enterprises that really need this sort of extended privacy and extended protection for data. And then eventually, if that kind of succeeds, then we can move on to more consumer grade material, which will be something like Facebook or social. So I feel like there's definitely some limitations in terms of development because it is harder. But by having this ID here, by having the ability for even data that's stored to scan and make sure that the people accessing it have the permission to do so, and that's the power of Elastos, that's what makes this project a little bit special and more special than everything else. And one thing that I want to add to this is that it's very different from other blockchain projects, say, for example, the Ethereum virtual machine, because we know that Ethereum is also running its very own version of the EVM. So how is that different? The difference is that Ethereum is one big machine. So all the applications, all the files, they're all running on Ethereum, the same single machine. And that machine is actually distributed, or well, it's cloned on every computer that runs the Ethereum full node. So what happens here is that the applications or the smart contracts can all interact with each other freely. That's by their addresses. So you can use Etherscan to query, or if you're a smart contract, you can query other addresses. And you can do that freely and openly. So in that sense, there is no privacy, there's no confidentiality of information. Anyone can access it. And on top of that, that's connected to the internet. So you can access all of that information. So this is why Ethereum is one machine, ETH, and Elastos is many different machines connected together. And the permission for that connection, this is permission connection. So that what makes this whole network very different and what makes this project very kind of complementary to this whole ecosystem. So I hope this helped you understand Elastos a little bit better. And I hope if you guys have any better ways to explain it, I would love to hear it and hope to contribute to this whole understanding of this blockchain ecosystem that we're building. So guys, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope hit the likes if it helped you, and of course do share it if you're a fan of Elastos. Thank you guys so much for watching. See you next time.